Welcome back to Grudge Grace, where we explore the thin line between the supernatural and the unexplained. I'm your host, and today we have a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about dreams, isolation, and the presence of the unseen. Before we begin, I want to remind our listeners that this story contains mature themes and disturbing content. If you're listening alone at night, you might want to grab a friend or turn on some extra lights. Today's story comes from Marcus, a 34-year-old construction worker who reached out to us after experiencing something that changed his life forever. Marcus has been living in Nevada for the past 9 years, but what happened to him in a remote desert rental changed everything he believed about reality. Picture this. You're living completely alone in the Nevada desert. The nearest neighbor is miles away, and the only sign of civilization is a small plant nursery run by an elderly rancher who closes up shop every evening at 8 p.m. This was Marcus's reality for 18 months. Marcus had been unemployed for over a year, living off his savings in a small rental room he'd found through a Craigslist ad. The landlord, an older gentleman named Bill who owned the plant nursery, had seemed friendly enough when Marcus first moved in. The rent was cheap, suspiciously cheap actually, and Marcus had even paid 5 months in advance. The room itself was basic, no air conditioning, just a small window unit that barely worked during the scorching Nevada summers. Marcus had to buy a swamp cooler just to make it through the heat. The isolation didn't bother him at first. He was hoping to save enough money to eventually move to Europe, maybe start fresh somewhere new. But isolation has a way of playing tricks on your mind, and Marcus was about to discover just how thin the veil between reality and nightmare could become. For the first month, everything seemed normal. Marcus had his routine: wake up late, check job boards online, maybe drive the 10 miles to the nearest diner for a meal. The evenings were quiet, peaceful even. He'd call his mother back in Michigan, catch up with his brother, who ran a small business there. But then the dreams started. They began subtly, as these things often do. Marcus would dream of falling, but just before he hit the ground, he'd wake up with his heart racing. We've all had those dreams, right? That sensation of falling that jerks you awake in the middle of the night. But Marcus's dreams were different. In his dreams, something was approaching him, something he couldn't quite see clearly. It would reach out as if to embrace him, but just before it could touch him, he'd wake up gasping. It happened every single night, Marcus told us during our interview. I'd be lying there, perfectly still, and this thing would come closer and closer. I could feel its presence, you know? Like when someone's standing behind you, and you can just sense they're there. His mother suggested he keep a Bible by his bedside, maybe say some prayers before sleep. Marcus wasn't particularly religious, but desperation makes believers of us all. He started reading scripture, hoping for peaceful sleep, but the dreams persisted. Living alone in the desert is an experience most of us can't imagine. When that plant nursery closed at 8 p.m., Marcus was truly alone. No neighbors, no passing traffic, no city lights bleeding through the curtains, just him, the desert wind, and an endless expanse of sand and sagebrush. The nearest town was a 30-minute drive away, a small truck stop with a diner, and a gas station. Most nights, Marcus would hear the distant rumble of 18-wheelers on the highway, but even that sound seemed to fade into the desert silence. His family back in Michigan thought he was having some kind of breakdown. His brother would laugh during their phone calls, saying things like, What did you expect? Living out there like some kind of hermit, come back and work with us? But Marcus had his reasons for staying. He was waiting for his visa application to be processed, hoping to start fresh in Europe. He'd already been rejected once, but he was determined to try again. The cheap rent meant he could save money while he waited. Little did he know that something was waiting for him too. 4 months into his desert isolation, the dreams evolved into something far more disturbing. Marcus would dream of a man in burial clothes, pale and gaunt, reaching out and whispering, "Save me." But dreams were just the beginning. One night, around 11 p.m., Marcus had just settled into his room when he heard a distinct knock on his door. 3 firm raps. He froze, listening. The plant nursery had been closed for hours, and there was no reason for anyone to be out there. Marcus approached the door cautiously. "Hello?" he called out. No response. He waited a moment, then opened the door. Nothing. Just the empty desert stretching out under the starlight. "I convinced myself it was just Bill playing a prank," Marcus recalls. "The old-timers out here, they like to mess with people sometimes, but deep down, I knew something was wrong." He checked around the property, looking for footprints in the sand, any sign that someone had been there. But the desert doesn't lie. There were no tracks, no evidence of any visitor. That night, Marcus barely slept, and when he did drift off, the man in burial clothes returned, more vivid than ever, pleading, "Save me." The paranormal activity escalated quickly after that first knock. Marcus's room had a small window opening that looked out toward the plant nursery. He'd covered it with a tarp to keep out dust and insects, securing it carefully with clips and ties. The next day, while he was sitting on his bed, the tarp suddenly fell, just dropped straight down as if someone had cut the ties. "I checked everything," Marcus told us. "Those clips were industrial strength. I'd even reinforced them because of the windstorms we get out here. But it fell, like someone had just yanked it straight down." He searched the area outside the window, expecting to find someone hiding, maybe playing another prank. But there was nobody there. The latch on the playing outside gate was still locked. Over the next few days, the incidents multiplied. A water bottle would fall off the table right in front of him. His coffee mug would tip over by itself. Personal items he'd left in the small kitchen area would be scattered on the floor when he woke up. "At first I thought maybe it was rats," Marcus explains. "Desert rats can be pretty bold, but I never saw any rats, and these weren't the kind of disturbances rats would make. Things were falling that shouldn't have been able to fall." The bathroom window became a particular source of terror for Marcus. It faced directly toward the plant nursery, and he never left it open, partly for security, partly because the view at night unsettled him. But one night, he discovered the window was open, not just unlocked, but wide open, as if someone had deliberately pushed it up. The lock on that window was solid, Marcus insists. It couldn't have opened from wind or settling. Someone or something had to have opened it. He closed it, checked the lock, and went about his evening routine. But a few nights later, at 3 a.m., he was heading to the bathroom when he saw the window was open again. This time, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A bright light moved quickly across the window from outside, but it wasn't the beam of a flashlight. It was more like a glowing orb, moving with purpose, intelligence. "I stood there watching it," Marcus recalls, his voice still shaky even. Months later. "It wasn't random movement. This thing was aware of me. It moved like it was trying to communicate something." Marcus shouted out, calling on every prayer he could remember. The light vanished instantly, but the window remained open, as if inviting him to look closer. He spent the rest of the night awake, reciting prayers and trying to convince himself it had been his imagination. As the paranormal activity increased, so did the intensity of Marcus's dreams. The man in burial clothes appeared more frequently, always with the same desperate plea, "Save me." His face, Marcus tells us, was horrifying. It looked like someone had pressed hot coals against his skin, he describes. His eyes were sunken and his mouth moved like he was struggling to speak, but the words came out clear. "Asday, save me." These weren't ordinary nightmares. Marcus would wake up with physical symptoms, racing heart, cold sweats, and an overwhelming sense of dread that would last for hours. He started calling friends back home in the middle of the night, just to hear another human voice. Then came the night that changed everything. Marcus was on the phone with a friend sitting on his bed around midnight. Behind the bed was a small concrete slab that served as a makeshift table. As he talked, he felt a presence behind him. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. When he turned around, the man from his dreams was sitting on the slab, not dreaming, Marcus emphasizes, wide awake, on the phone, and this thing was just sitting there staring at me with those burned-looking eyes. Marcus dropped the phone and ran outside into the desert night. He stayed out there for 2 hours, too terrified to go back inside, even to retrieve his phone. I sat in the sand, looking at my room, knowing that thing was in there. He recalls. For 2 hours, I didn't see a single car on the highway. I was completely alone with whatever was in my room. Desperate and terrified, Marcus finally called his uncle Robert, who lived about 120 miles away in Reno. Robert was what you might call a spiritual who dealt with things that conventional religion couldn't explain. I told him everything, Marcus says. The dreams, the paranormal activity, seeing this thing in my room. He listened without judgment, which was more than I got from my family. Robert drove out to the desert immediately. When he arrived, he asked Marcus to sit on the floor while he performed what he called a consultation. He started speaking in a language I didn't recognize, Marcus recalls. Arabic, I think, and then everything went black. When Marcus regained consciousness, Robert was on the phone with the police. "Your uncle called 911?" we asked. "Yeah, and that's when I knew this was bigger than just dreams and paranormal activity." The police arrived within an hour, and Robert explained something that Marcus hadn't expected. During the spiritual consultation, Robert had made contact with what he described as an earthbound spirit, the entity that had been appearing to Marcus. "The spirit was trying to communicate through you," Robert explained to the Sirius police. "It was indicating that something was buried near the property." The area Robert indicated was the small gully-like depression next to Marcus's room, the same area that the landlord Bill had specifically told Marcus to avoid. Bill always said not to throw trash over there, Marcus remembers. He said that area had nothing to do with me, that I shouldn't mess with it. At the time, I thought he was just being particular about his property. Using shovels from the plant nursery, the police began digging. What they found confirmed Robert's spiritual reading and explained months of supernatural terror. There was a body buried there, a human body wrapped in plastic and buried in a shallow grave. The moment they uncovered it, Marcus tells us, I knew it was the person who had been appearing to me in dreams. Same build, same facial structure. Even in death, I could see the resemblance. The police investigation that followed revealed a disturbing truth about Marcus's landlord. Bill, the plant nursery owner, had disappeared the same week the body was discovered. The nursery remained closed, and no one had seen him since. According to Robert's spiritual reading, the buried person had been murdered, and the spirit had been trying to communicate this to Marcus for months. The paranormal activity, the dreams, the apparitions, all of it was this person's desperate attempt to reveal the truth about their death. The spirit was Arab, Robert explained to Marcus later. That's why it was. Speaking Arabic, during our consultation, it was trying to tell us about the murder. The police investigation continued for weeks. Marcus, still paying rent on a room next to a crime scene, found himself trapped in the middle of a murder investigation. He couldn't leave. He'd prepaid his rent and didn't have money for alternative housing. For a month, police cars were out there every day, Marcus recalls. I couldn't go anywhere without being questioned, and I'm living 20 feet from where someone was murdered. The case eventually went cold. The police never found Bill, and the identity of the victim remained unknown. But for Marcus, the supernatural activity stopped completely once the body was discovered. It was like the spirit finally got what it needed, he reflects. Once the truth was revealed, the dreams stopped, the paranormal activity ended, I could finally sleep peacefully. Marcus eventually saved enough money to leave Nevada, though not for Europe, as he'd originally planned. The experience had changed him fundamentally. I'm not the same person I was before, he admits. When something like that happens to you, when you realize how thin the barrier is between our world and whatever comes after, it changes your perspective on everything. He's more spiritual now, more aware of the unseen world around us. He's also more cautious about isolation, about the places he chooses to live. I'll never live alone in a remote area again, he says. Not because I'm afraid of ghosts, but because I'm afraid of people that body didn't bury itself. Someone killed that person and left them there, and I was living right next to it for months. The experience also deepened his relationships with his family. His brother, who had dismissed Marcus's accounts as stress-induced hallucinations, apologized after learning about the murder investigation. He realized I hadn't been having a breakdown, Marcus explains. Something real was happening to me, something beyond normal explanation. We asked Marcus's uncle Robert to share his perspective on what happened in the desert. As someone who deals with spiritual matters, Robert wasn't surprised by Marcus's experience. Violent death can create spiritual disturbances, Robert explains. When someone dies traumatically, especially if they're murdered and left without proper burial, their spirit can become earthbound. They're trying to complete unfinished business. According to Robert, Marcus was particularly susceptible to spiritual contact because of his isolation and emotional state. He was alone, vulnerable, and in close proximity to the burial site, Robert notes. The spirit recognized him as someone who might be able to help. The dreams, Robert believes, were the spirit's initial attempts at communication. When that didn't work, the activity escalated to physical manifestations. The spirit became more desperate as time went on, Robert explains. It needed someone to discover the body to reveal the truth about the murder. Marcus was the only person available. And so many questions about Marcus's experience remain unanswered. The identity of the buried person was never established. Bill, the plant nursery owner, was never found. The murder was never solved. I think about that person sometimes, Marcus reflects. Who were they? Did they have a family looking for them? How long had they been buried there? The Police investigation revealed that Bill had owned the property for over a decade, but his background was surprisingly difficult to trace. He'd paid cash for the land and had few connections to the local community. He was always friendly when I saw him, Marcus recalls. But looking back, there were signs he was very particular about certain areas of the property. He didn't like people asking questions about his past. The fact that the spirit appeared to be Arab raises additional questions. Was the victim an immigrant worker? Someone who disappeared without anyone noticing? There are a lot of undocumented workers in the agricultural areas of Nevada, Marcus notes. People who could disappear without anyone filing missing person reports. Marcus's story raises important questions about the nature of consciousness, death, and justice. If we accept that his experience was genuine, and the discovery of the body suggests it was, what does this tell us about the survival of consciousness after death? I used to be skeptical about this stuff, Marcus admits. I thought people who claimed to see ghosts were either lying or delusional. But when it happens to you, when you're living it, you can't deny it. The experience also highlights issues of justice and closure. The murdered person's spirit, according to Robert's interpretation, couldn't rest until the truth was revealed. This aligns with spiritual beliefs from many cultures about the importance of proper burial and resolution of earthly matters. In many traditions, violent death creates spiritual unrest. Robert explains, the spirit remains connected to the physical world until justice is served or the truth is revealed. For Marcus, the experience has also raised questions about the isolation and vulnerability of people living on the margins of society. Whoever killed that person thought they could just bury them and no one would care, he reflects. But even in death, that person fought to be heard. How do you return to normal life after an experience like Marcus's? How do you sleep peacefully when you know that the supernatural world can intrude into the physical one? It took months, Marcus admits. Even after I moved away from Nevada, I'd wake up expecting to see that figure at the foot of my bed. I'd check locks, obsessively investigate every strange noise. Therapy helped, though finding a therapist who could address the spiritual dimensions of his experience was challenging. Most mental health professionals want to explain away supernatural experiences, Marcus notes. They assume you're having hallucinations or a psychological breakdown, but how do you explain finding a dead body based on information from a dream? Marcus eventually found a therapist who specialized in what she called spiritual emergencies, psychological crises triggered by supernatural experiences. She helped me understand that what happened to me wasn't a sign of mental illness, he explains. It was a genuine spiritual experience, and I needed to process it as such. Marcus wanted to share his story not just to process his own experience, but to help others who might be going through similar situations. If someone else is having supernatural experiences, I want them to know they're not crazy, he says. These things can happen. There are people who can help. He's particularly concerned about people who are isolated, as he was, and might be vulnerable to spiritual contact. If you're living alone and strange things start happening, don't just dismiss it, he advises. And don't suffer in silence. Find someone who takes these experiences seriously. Robert, Marcus's uncle, has since worked with several other people who've had similar experiences. He believes that spiritual disturbances are more common than most people realize. Many people have supernatural experiences, but don't talk about them because they're afraid of being labeled as mentally ill, Robert explains. But these experiences are real and they often carry important messages. 3 years after the discovery of the body, the case remains unsolved. Bill was never found, and the identity of the victim was never established. The plant nursery property was eventually sold to a developer who plans to build a small housing development. I wonder if the new residents will know what happened there, Marcus muses. Will they experience anything? Or did the spirit find peace once the body was discovered? According to Robert, the spiritual activity should have ceased once the truth was revealed and the body was properly handled by authorities. The spirit's purpose was to ensure the murder was discovered, Robert explains. Once that was accomplished, there should be no reason for continued earthbound activity. But Marcus sometimes wonders about the broader implications of his experience. How many other unsolved murders might be generating spiritual disturbances? How many people are having supernatural experiences that are actually attempts at communication from crime victims? It makes you think about all the missing person cases, all the cold case files, he reflects. How many of those people are still trying to tell their stories? Despite the terror of his experience, Marcus says he's grateful for what happened. It changed his life in ways he never expected. I'm more aware now, he explains. More aware of the spiritual world more. Aware of the people around me. More aware of the injustices that happen in silence. He's also become more connected to his family and more intentional about his relationships. When you realize how thin the barrier is between life and death, you appreciate the people in your life more. He says, you don't take relationships for granted. Marcus has also become something of an advocate for people who have supernatural experiences. He's connected with support groups and online communities where people share similar stories. There are more of us than you might think, he notes. People who've had genuine encounters with the supernatural. We support each other because sometimes we're the only ones who truly understand what it's like. What can we learn from Marcus's experience? Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, his story offers several important insights. First, it reminds us that isolated people are vulnerable, not just to spiritual contact, but to crime and exploitation. The murdered person buried on Bill's property was likely someone who wouldn't be missed, someone on the margins of society. Second, it highlights the importance of taking people's experiences seriously, even when they seem impossible. Marcus's family initially dismissed his accounts as stress-induced hallucinations, but the discovery of the body validated his supernatural encounters. Third, it suggests that unresolved injustices can have consequences that extend beyond the physical world. The murdered person's spirit, according to Robert's interpretation, couldn't rest until the truth was revealed. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Marcus says, you have to acknowledge that something led to the discovery of that body. Something guided us to dig in exactly the right place. Finally, Marcus's story reminds us that we're all more connected than we might think to each other, to the past, and to forces beyond our understanding. Marcus is now married and living in a small town in Oregon. He works as a contractor and has built a quiet, stable life far from the Nevada desert, but his experience continues to influence his daily life. I pay attention to things differently now, he explains. I notice when places feel wrong, when people seem off. I trust my instincts more than I used to. He's also maintained his connection to the spiritual community that helped him through his crisis. He occasionally consults with Robert about supernatural experiences that others have shared with him. People reach out to me sometimes, Marcus says. They've heard my story and want to share their own experiences. I try to help them find the support they need. The Nevada desert property where Marcus lived has been developed into a small residential community. The new residents, as far as anyone knows, haven't reported any supernatural activity. I hope that person found peace, Marcus reflects. I hope they're able to rest now that the truth is known. Marcus's story challenges us to consider possibilities beyond our everyday understanding of reality. Whether you approach it from a spiritual, psychological, or purely empirical perspective, the fact remains that his supernatural experiences led to the discovery of a murder victim. For Marcus, the experience was transformative, but not one he'd wish on anyone else. It changed my life in positive ways, he reflects, but the terror was real. The isolation was real. The sense of being haunted by something you can't understand or control, that's not something I'd want anyone to go through. His story also serves as a reminder that our world contains mysteries we may never fully understand. The relationship between consciousness and death, the nature of spiritual experience, the possibility of communication beyond the grave. These questions have fascinated humanity for millennia. I don't have all the answers, Marcus admits. I just know what happened to me. And I know that the world is more complex and mysterious than most of us realize. As we wrap up this episode of Grudge Grace, we're left with these questions. How many other voices are trying to be heard? How many other truths are waiting to be revealed? And how open are we to possibilities that challenge our understanding of reality? The desert keeps its secrets, but sometimes, just sometimes, the dead find ways to speak. That concludes our story for today. If you've had a supernatural experience you'd like to share, you can reach out to us through our website. And if you're struggling with paranormal encounters, remember that there are people who can help, spiritual advisors, therapists who specialize in these experiences and support communities where you can share your story without judgment. Thank you for joining us on Grudge Grace. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and remember, the world is far more mysterious than we imagine.